Hi everyone, this is Neill. So the first thing I want to say is congratulations on your assignments. I've really enjoyed reading them, and I think they were, a really, really good bunch of assignments. I think you've done really well. And the thing that I most enjoyed about them, I have to say, given that the essay title, or the first two learning outcomes at least, ask you to demonstrate professional competence as a teacher and then self-evaluate, I thought that the amount of really good teaching practice that was on display in your assignments was just fantastic. And it was equally just heartwarming, actually, to read everybody's accounts of how your teaching has changed. And in some people's cases, changed massively already, just in the course of, the 6 months that you were on the PG cert at the beginning of this year. And I think that's a testament to just how open-minded people have been and how committed you've been to, really wanting to use the PG cert to improve your practice. So I thought that was absolutely great. And from BIM's perspective, this is just such a good thing. So yeah, really good. Really enjoyed seeing that a lot. As I explained in the blog, what we're going to do in terms of feedback for this assignment is we're going to do it in the form of a dialogue. We're not going to do it in the form of a monologue. You're not just going to get feedback handed down on high from the tutor. Much as I like to think I know what I'm talking about, I know it's much more effective if we engage in dialogue around the feedback, because it's a way of really helping you engage more deeply with the feedback and make some sensible autonomous decisions for yourself about what it is that you recognise you need to work on next. So this is giving you a lot of responsibility and autonomy in a way that I think is really effective. So this little presentation is designed to support you in your self-review and your peer review of your PG01 assignments and with the blocking task that you're about to undertake over the next couple of weeks. So just to give you a very quick overview of what I'm going to cover in these slides. First of all, I'm just going to make sure that everyone really understands what the grades mean and what they don't mean. I'm going to give you some feedback on the things that have worked well and haven't always worked so well in the assignments that I've read. So we're going to look at three things. We're going to look at attending to the verb in the assessment brief. We're going to look at the ways in which people have been using reading and research. And we're going to look at the ways in which people have been getting their critical thinking down on paper. So that's kind of reflecting back really specifically on some of the things that I've been seeing when I've read. But I'm going to give you two forms of feed forward as well. So the first is feed forward, which is specifically about the ways in which you write about your own practice. So, how do we write really good, professional, reflective pieces of writing? And we're going to look at two things. We're going to look at developing your ability to write really effective case studies and use an evaluation cycle to write critically about your own work. And we're going to talk about something new, which is starting from this point in the PG cert. You haven't been asked to do this yet. This is coming in for the rest of the PG cert, which is beginning to think about actually evaluating the theories themselves rather than just using them or putting them into practice. Then I'm going to end with a few ideas which are feed forward around your teaching, things specifically related to things I've been reading in your assignments, which is thinking about how you're going to use your action research projects, your ARPs, to help enact your values more fully, thinking about how you're going to track your CPD plans, your continuing professional development plans, and encouraging you to use your forthcoming observations to ask for very specific feedback and link this to your deliberate practice. So that's what we're going to have a little look at in this assessment. So the first thing is I want everyone to be really clear about what the grades actually mean, okay? And I don't want to kind of labour this, but it's really important that people understand this. The grade you got for your assignment is not a measure of your quality as a teacher, right? I can see in everybody's assignments that there's been really effective, thoughtful, good, well-informed teaching going on right across the board, okay? The grade is simply a measure of the success of your essay. So in other words, it's a measurement of how successful you've been in capturing the thinking that's underlaying your teaching and getting that down on paper, okay? The other thing to say about PG certs is that most PG certs in the country are ungraded. As you know, the Middlesex version of this was ungraded. What really matters is passing, okay? Because passing says you have reached the professional grade. It's a bit like, you can think of it like your driving test. You're either competent to be let out on the roads by yourself, or you're not. So it's really, really all about passing, because that shows that you've met the professional grade, okay? Should you get a merit or a distinction, that's a lovely bonus. It's a nice thing to be able to brag about, but actually most people won't even be expecting that you would have a merit or a distinction, because as I say, the vast majority of PG certs are simply pass-fail. So if you've got it on your CV and you pass the PG cert and you go, I've passed the PG cert, no one's going to ask about that. Go, oh, did you just get a pass? If you got a merit or a distinction, then that's going to be a lovely thing to kind of brag about, and that's great. And as you might expect from a whole group of students working at master's level, particularly in their first assignment, there was a spread from passes through merits through distinctions, and there were most passes, and then there was the next number of merits, and then there was fewest distinctions. That's not in any way deliberate. That's nothing to do with the grade curve or any of that nonsense, because you all know I don't buy into norm reference grading. I think it's complete load of old rubbish. That's just how it came out. But everyone was graded by criterion referenced grading. So there's the Sussex grade criteria in front of us, and we use the criterion that fits what we see on the page. And there's no predetermination about, oh, there has to be so many passes or so many merits or so many distinctions. Everybody gets what they get according to those criteria, and just be very clear about that. The other thing I should say is that from Sussex you get both a letter grade and a percentage, because each letter has a percentage equivalent. And the letter grades look really mean and a bit dispiriting, and I want you to be aware of that. And I'll come on to that in just a second. Now, in terms of the percentage grades, at master's level for Sussex, the way they do it is that a pass is 50% and above, a merit is 60% and above, and a distinction is 70% and above. Now, the pass, merit, and distinction actually only really come in terms of the overall PG cert. So at the end of the PG cert, when you've done your 3 modules, we simply take the average of the marks that you've got, and then according to where that average comes out, it's pass, merit, distinction. And you do have to, just to be clear, you do have to pass all 3 modules. And I'm sure you're aware of this already. If the worst comes to the worst, anyone hasn't yet achieved the learning outcomes, there's always a reset opportunity, and you get plenty of support for that. So that's absolutely fine. Okay. But what people are given in the first instance are letter grades, and these are sometimes referred to as alpha grades, because this is Sussex using what's called categorical marking. So it's not just on a sliding scale of percentages where you can end up with any percentage going, that's marked against specific categories. So to get a pass, a D plus is a pass, that's 50%, and a C minus is a good pass, that's 55%. Now, if I suddenly got a piece of work back and it had D plus on it, I would probably go into a major decline and think, oh my God, I must have failed. But actually, and this is what I mean when I say the letter grades look mean, actually no, D plus is a pass. The 2 grades for merit are C, which is 60%, and C plus, which is 65%. For a distinction, there's B minus, is 70%, so B minus is the lowest distinction grade. B is 75, B plus is 80, and then for absolutely outstanding pieces of work, you've got the A grades, A minus 85, A 90, A plus 95. So that's how the letter grades work. Somewhat ironically, Moodle doesn't accept letter grades, so you may very well only see your percentage grade anyway, but this explains why everybody is going to get a mark which ends in either a 0 or a 5, because that's how the system works. Okay, so let's move on to some feedback about some of the common things I saw when I was reading everybody's assignments. The first thing is, and in a way I'm flagging this a little bit more for PG02, it is really important that you pay attention to the verb in the assessment brief. So in the essay, you were asked to show how the PG Cert had informed and improved your teaching. So we're looking for well-informed teaching so that your thinking is clear, and we're looking for some kind of description of ways in which you either tried to improve your teaching and it did or didn't work, or you've improved your teaching and it did work. And I remember we discussed this certainly in the groups that I was with for your final PG01 sessions in June. And I found that everyone was really good on the inform part, but not necessarily paying as much attention to the improve part. So it's really important to pay attention to all the verbs. In the PG02 assignment, the verbs ask you to critically evaluate, and I've just marked some of the Brighton graduate group, and unfortunately I've had to fail some of them because they certainly described and explained, but they didn't critically evaluate. I mean, in a way, we're back to Bloom's taxonomy here, aren't we? So very important that you attend to what the verb in the assessment brief is asking you to do. The other 2 areas that I thought were really interesting in reading your work was the ways in which you've been using reading and research, and the ways in which you were getting your critical thinking down on paper. So in terms of reading and research, the very best assignments were great because you used reading in really specific ways. You were either quoting from an exact place in the reading, or you were paraphrasing it accurately, and most importantly, you linked the reading to your own practice. The reading wasn't just kind of shoved in to show, oh, hey, look, I've done some reading. It was very specifically linked to, I read this, it made me think this, and this is what I did. And that's really, really good. If you can write in that way, that's, top notch. Less successful assignments either referred to the reading in rather overgeneralized ways. So, Hattie says, blah, blah, and I find myself thinking, well, I know that's true, and it sort of sounds pedantic in a way, but actually from the point of view of essay writing technique, this is really important. I'm like, well, where does he say that? I need to know where he says that. And also, overgeneralized in a second way, which was not so tightly and clearly linked to people's practice. So you'd have somebody describing, maybe writing about something they'd done, and then kind of quoting a bit of reading which was sort of about the same topic, but wasn't really linked to explaining how the reading had been used to inform your decision-making practice around the way in which you taught. So you need to be specific about which bit of reading you're talking about, either quote or paraphrase, and you need to be really specific in how you're linking it to your own practice. The other thing that occasionally happened was that people would make rather sweeping assertions, and certainly at master's level that's not going to work in terms of essay technique. Studies have shown that ... And it's like, well, yeah, okay. So which studies? What have you been reading? Where have you got that? Where have you got that from? Or is it just occasionally it felt a little bit like quite loose pub talk in some cases of the kinds of things teachers might sort of say as if they were very certain about it, but it was just very overgeneralized. One thing that came out this year, probably more than I've ever seen before, which I thought was great, was many of you have made just excellent use of your teaching observations. Certainly in terms of, the bit about the assignment that was asking you to demonstrate your competence in teaching. Absolutely fantastic evidence coming out of your teaching obs. It worked really, really well when people were quoting directly from their teaching obs, and I would absolutely encourage you to carry on doing that. Now, I do know that Sue and Jill want to slightly change how they give feedback this year, and it won't necessarily be so much written, it's going to be more verbal. So I'm really encouraging everybody, record those conversations with Sue and Jill, because you can quote from an audio, you can transcribe from an audio and quote from an audio just as well as you can quote from something that's written. It's equally legitimate, but I'd really encourage you to carry on doing that. Generally, there was a really good range of reading, and I was very impressed. There were a lot of people who'd gone off, found different things, read things that weren't on the PG Cert reading list, had maybe got interested in a few cases, there were some really great essays where people had got interested in a particular topic that we touched on in the PG Cert, but hadn't looked at in so much depth, and they'd gone off and done a whole load of really great independent reading and research around that, and I was very impressed by that. So it's really good to see you, engaging with a good range of reading, and beginning to use it effectively. You're absolutely on track with that, and we'll keep on pushing with that, obviously, because that's important all the way through now. It's not like job done. It's job done very well so far, and let's keep developing it. That's really good. And just as a little slight naggy thing, it's really important that whenever you've got an in-text citation, whether you're quoting or paraphrasing, you do have to remember to include a page number. Sometimes just the book was referred to, but there was no specific reference to the page number, so we really needed that as well. Now, in terms of giving a little bit of feed forward on the reading, what I noticed was that the vast majority of you were mainly using your reading. This is Quinal doing a bit of cleaning up around me. The vast majority of you were mainly using your reading effectively to help you with your planning and explain the thinking behind your planning, which was absolutely great. And what worked really, really well was that your teaching decisions were well informed. You weren't just teaching on instinct. You had reasons, theories and models and ideas underpinning what you were choosing to do, and discussing that really allowed you to show your teacher thinking. And I remember saying to you all before, and it was also in the little video I made in the summer helping you prepare for your assignments, we're really looking for you to show and share your thinking. So that's great. I would say for most people, the main area for development now is to use your reading at the other end of the process and use it to help you interpret and explain what's been happening in your classrooms. And some of you had started to do this and started to do this really effectively. So it's like, okay, I read this, I decided to do this, blah, 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 this is what happened, blah, blah, blah. And then when I'm trying to understand and interpret what happened and see what I can learn from it and see what I can improve next, then the reading was coming back in at that part of the evaluation cycle as well, to really inform your thinking about what might be going on, or to kind of inform your hunches of why you thought things were happening. So for most of us, really important development area now is to start using the reading more at the interpretation end of things as well. And we'll be working on this together now for the rest of the PG Cert, so that's fine. In terms of the critical thinking, in a way I've just said this, the most successful assessments really made the thinking behind your actions very clear. So you were sharing your thinking, and it was well informed, and you were being very observant, and you were actively looking for evidence of what was working and what wasn't working, and that's all absolutely spot on. I mean, these are the actions of expert and highly effective teachers. So this was fantastic to see. Some of the slightly less successful assignments did tend to overly focus on the narrative and to sort of describe what you were doing. And again, I could see that it was working well and your practice was of a very high level, but the thinking behind it wasn't made explicit or shared. And it's really important that we get that. And the biggest single grade differentiator, and I'm going to come on to talk about this a little bit more in a moment, was really how effectively you used an evaluation cycle to really evaluate your practice. That was the thing that made the biggest single difference to people's grades. And by and large, I would say for most of you, you're currently stronger then on reflection for action. So doing your reading and doing your thinking to help you decide what you're going to do, right? And we're going to try and develop now 2 other forms of relationship between reflection and action from now on. One of which is then reflection on actions. This is what I've just been talking about. Thinking about and evaluating what happened after the event, using theory to help inform those evaluations, and then using that to decide what you're going to do next. That's something that's going to need to come out very strongly, particularly in both of your forthcoming assignments, your PG02 and your action research assignment. And this won't necessarily come out in the assignments, but this is just a really important teacher skill for all of us. Reflection in action. To what extent am I able to reflect and course correct or identify really important teachable moments and sort of drop my plan because I think, oh no, something more important is going on here, while I'm actually in the process of teaching itself. And that's obviously really significant. Now, let's have a little focus on the main 2 areas for development as you're working on improving your ability to write your assignments and to write really good master's level, critically reflective, professional, developmental pieces of work. And the 2 areas are thinking about writing more effective case studies and using the evaluation cycle better. So in a way that's poised between what I've seen already and where we're going. And then pure feed forward, which is we're going to start bringing in now a new element, something you haven't been asked to do up to this point, which is thinking about how you're going to evaluate the theories themselves rather than just use or apply them. So in terms of thinking about case studies and the evaluation cycle, first thing to say is we're going to start working together on writing really good case studies over the coming months after January. So we're going to be doing this on the blog, and it's going to be a really important activity for everyone to participate in because it's very directly linked to helping you be successful at the end of the PG Cert. And the point about doing these is it's going to help you really refine your ability to produce very sort of sharp, focused and specific evaluations of your work. Again, the essays that were most successful that I read were very concrete and very specific, and there were very clear examples or case studies of what you'd done in the classroom that were very well worked through. The ones which weren't as successful were the ones that sort of tended to describe a little bit more generally or in a less focused way the sorts of things that you had tended to be doing but didn't really hone in on something that was absolutely specific and concrete, and that works much better. And what I found was, I'm just going to remind you on the next slide of what we mean by the evaluation cycle, because we've looked at this before, but now it's about getting really, really good and effective at using it. Both, incidentally, being effective at using it to help you structure your writing, I mean, that's one thing, but I think more importantly, get really effective at using it for ourselves in our weekly teaching and our weekly practice as educators, because if we use this cycle in reality and we use it effectively, it is absolutely the engine to help us improve and accelerate our improvement, help us improve rapidly and help us improve in a really, really focused way. I think it's probably the most important thing I learned in my early days as a teacher was to do this, because it's really underpinned my growth and development as a teacher. And what I found was, for most assignments I read, sort of the amount of attention to the cycle became less as you went through it. So, and we can link this cycle to Kolb, of course, right? So the first part of the cycle was, it's sort of in between plan and do, but let's say it's really about do. What did I plan to do and why? How is my action? How is the thing I've decided to do in my classroom informed by my reading? And this tended to be the strongest for most people. This was the reflection for action part. Most people tended to be strongest at this. So then you do whatever you do, and then we get into the reflect stage, which is, okay, what happened? What worked well? What didn't work well? And what's my evidence for this? Now, kind of the gold standard here, and the very best assignments did this, was when we talked about what's my evidence for this. First of all, you were writing about very specific concrete examples, okay, as I just said. So the evidence was specific. And the really, really strongest ones, and there were some outstanding assignments, was that evidence was triangulated. In other words, the evidence came from your own observations and feedback from students and comments that had come from your observers. So the more you were able to generate evidence that came from more than one angle, the stronger this got. And the best observation evidence, so the things that you were observing yourself, again, was very specific and very concrete. So, people wouldn't say, oh, the students seemed happy. They would say, I noticed people were more engaged on the task and they asked more questions and there was more cooperation and there was less talk off topic. You can go back to that very early blog task we did in the first term, where I was asking you to look at your classroom and write about all the different student behaviours that were going on and which were functional and which were dysfunctional. And that's a really good model for how you write about things in ways which are very specific. So there was more of a range, really, at this point in terms of reading your assignments. And so for some of you, this is going to be the first thing to work on. When you're thinking about developing your skills at using the evaluation cycle, either for yourself as a teacher or being able to write it down, do it in the order in which it appears. Work your way through it piece by piece. So if this is your starting point and you need to get better at thinking about evidence, right, start here. Having sort of figured out very specifically what worked well, what didn't, and what your evidence for it, the reflect stage, then we move into the explain stage. Now, I have to say, across most of the assignments, this was the weakest part. So for many of you, this is going to be the area, well, for the vast majority of you, this is going to be an area that you're going to need to work on developing. For some of you, it will be the first thing if you've already cracked the evidence stage. If you need to work on the evidence stage, you work on that first, and then you're going to come to this next, okay? But it's the bit about explaining to yourself, okay, so I know what happened, but why? Why did I think that happened? And what we're going to start practice doing is coming up with our best hypothesis of why we think something happened, and then our best alternative hypothesis of why we think something happened. Because, classrooms are really complicated places. There's an awful lot of different stuff going on at the same time. And it's not often that you, hand on heart, 100% know for certain why something happened. So what we're doing is we're hypothesizing, right? And we're looking, as I mentioned earlier on, we're looking to see that our hypotheses are informed again by our reading, just as our action and our decisions about what to do have been informed by our reading. We want to see that our hypotheses are informed by reading as well. Other people's ideas out there give us lenses through which we can look at our classroom. And then, of course, and funnily enough, this tended to be a stronger section for most of you, but would have been improved had you been through the reflect and explain in more detail, because, of course, that strengthens the plan. The planning phase is, okay, so what have I learned from this? What am I going to do next time and why? We can start thinking about the planning now in two ways as well. And this is going to be new for, I think, all of you. Up till now, we've been thinking about the planning phase in as sort of forward-looking, essentially, and something which is very action-focused. What am I going to do to try to improve my teaching, or what am I going to do to try to improve what happens in class? Okay, so that's very action-focused. We can build another element into our planning now, which is that we can link it back to the explain phase. If I've got a hypothesis about why I think something's happening or working in my classroom, the plan can also allow me to think about how would I test whether I'm right about that or not. Because the more I can be certain that my hypothesis is correct, the more effective my plans are going to be. And again, we're going to work on that in the coming months, but we can start thinking about, okay, let's think about using the planning phase to design tests of our hypotheses. That's also going to be particularly relevant, of course, in your action research projects. The other thing that's going to be a new element from now on is getting to a place where we start really evaluating and thinking about the theories themselves. And this is going to move us beyond the focus we've had up to this point, because really the focus we've had up to this point has been very much about trying out new things in our teaching, trying theories, trying to apply them, and then evaluating ourselves in terms of, how well did it work? Did it not work? How well did I use it? Are there things I need to change? And that's exactly where you've been asked to get to at this point. Don't forget your first assignment was all about you demonstrating your professional competence as a teacher and reflecting on how well you've done. So that's perfect. You're where you need to get to. However, we're now going to take the next step forward, right? So this is why linking theory and practice particularly is a step, well, I suppose I shouldn't really say a step up because it's still at master's level. It's all been at master's level from the get-go. But it's certainly a step forward, or it's a step deeper, perhaps, which is we're now going to start asking ourselves the question, okay, now that I've tried putting a particular theory into practice, what do I think about the theory itself? And it's really important that we're linking the practice here. So you're never going to be asked, okay, read this theory, now tell me what you think, because I don't think that's a particularly meaningful activity. It's more, okay, read this theory, take on board this idea, take on board this model, try it out, and now tell me what you think, both in terms of what we've already been doing, how well did it work, do you think you used it well, and having tried it out, what do I think about the theory itself? This is just a fantastically important step forwards, right? And it really will help consolidate and accelerate all of our progress at getting better as teachers. I get very excited about this because I think this is where it gets really, really particularly interesting, and where there's the most learning at stake for us. And of course this opens new sorts of questions, different questions from ones we might have asked ourselves before. So we start thinking about theory in a more contextual way, and the best assignments have already been doing that. You've been linking the theory very specifically to your own contexts, but now we're going to be thinking very explicitly, okay, looking at this particular theory, how do I need to think about it and then adapt it so that it works best and meets my specific teaching contexts and needs? And then again, how can I evaluate it? How can I think about the strengths and weaknesses and adaptations necessary to the theory for my specific context once I've used it? So sometimes when you're evaluating theory having used it, you might say, well, I think these are the strengths, these are the weaknesses, or you might say, actually, it's kind of interesting as a generic theory, but for me to make it work in my context, I need to adapt it in this way. And that, that's evaluation and practice. That equally is a form of evaluation. And really getting our heads into beginning to think for ourselves and our own teaching, why do the things that we're using work? If you think about John Hattie's work on effect sizes, there's nothing in there that tells us why anything works. All it does is it says, if you look at this particular practice and measure how effective it is, this is the measurement of how effective on average it tends to be. But that's sort of the equivalent of saying, well, today's temperature is 30 degrees, but not saying why is today's temperature 30 degrees, what's going on in the weather that makes it 30 degrees. And the whole question about why something works, and this being context specific, and this is the part of the PG I think I probably love the most, is no one can figure that out apart from us. This is where we're now absolutely on the cutting edge of knowledge and trying to create knowledge which is absolutely particular to ourselves and relevant to ourselves, because there's nowhere where we can go and look for the answers. We just have to puzzle them out and figure them out ourselves, and we do that through engaging in critical dialogue with each other. So I think it's a really exciting phase of the PG Cert. We can ask ourselves now, we can become creative and go, well, okay, can I take different theories and synthesize them or combine them in a way which is original and interesting to myself? We can think about, okay, how am I going to think about clashing perspectives? This person says this, but this person says the opposite. So how am I going to deal with these kind of very clashing perspectives and figure them out for myself within my own context? A lot more kind of openness to creative and critical thinking here. And overall, I think the question for us now is, how do we become producers of theory rather than consumers of theory? And more specifically, how do I become a producer of a theory which is specific in my context? And by theory here, I mean, a theory of action that says to me, in my context, if I do this, this is going to be a good approach, or this is likely to be a good approach because. So I have a real kind of practice and understanding which are intertwined with each other, and I move beyond being a kind of a consumer of the rather generic theories that we've looked at to this point. So I hope you're going to find that it's challenging and it's intriguing, but I hope there's a real sense of excitement in you for that, because this, as I say, is where we kind of take a step deeper. And there's a real possibility for very rich learning and for real acceleration of the quality of our own practice as well. I think it's great. And finally, just a few little comments, thinking about some of the implications of feed forward that I find myself giving for your teaching. The first is, you were all talking about your values. Some of you were clearer about how they were enacted than others, so you need to be really clear about how your values were enacted. Some of you were much clearer about how happy you are with how your values are being enacted. So, for how successful does that feel to you at this point? And some of you said less than that. But what we're thinking about in terms of your action research project is how will you use that project to make your own values more fully present in your teaching in a way that satisfies you. So that's one thing to think about going forward. Next thing is you wrote brilliant CPD plans, continuing professional development plans. I was really, really impressed. The best ones combined elements of reading with elements of action. So I think it's really good to, if you've just got action in there, that's fantastic. But it's good to then think to yourself, how can I go and find some reading that's going to help me be really informed about these actions? But the question for everyone is, okay, that's great. You've actually got a really good plan. And for lots of you, I could totally see how it related to your essay or how it related to your values. I could completely see why these were really important things for you to focus on. But then we get busy. And, term starts and we're teaching 47 hours a week or whatever. So how are you going to keep track of your CPD? How are you going to keep on course with doing it? And how are you going to track for yourself and evaluate whether the things that you're doing are helping you achieve your goals or not? So that's really important. And linked to that, I would say from now on, always use your observations. And actually, I think you should ask your college observers to do the same thing, quite frankly, now that there's this really interesting way of doing observation at BIM. Use your observers to give you specific feedback. Tell them what you want feedback on and link that feedback to your deliberate practice, because the point of deliberate practice, remember, is two things. It's both having a focus of the thing you want to work on and eliciting feedback to see how well you're doing with that thing. It's not just having the focus and choosing what to work on. It's also, very importantly, about taking and using the feedback that's going to help you with those actions. Oh, and that is it. I say that's it. That's quite a lot of stuff to take on board. But of course, the whole point is you don't need to take all of this on board. You need to take on board the 2 or 3 things that are most relevant and important for you, for your development and your deliberate practice right now. Please think of it in terms of your teaching, but on the blog, we're going to focus specifically in terms of your essay writing and your professional writing. Okay, that's it.